We're going to move on to the section on transferable priority review vouchers. And the first speaker, I'm very pleased to welcome David Ridley from Duke University to talk us through some lessons learned from implementation in the US and potential projection into the EU. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Colin. So we've talked about a variety of pull mechanisms today, milestone payments, revenue guarantees, subscription models, and of course, exclusivity vouchers. I'm going to talk to you about yet another pull mechanism, this one where we had some experience in the United States, and I'll tell you a bit about our experience in the US. Next. So as you know, an exclusivity voucher adds, say, 12 months on to the end of sales for a product. Priority voucher does the opposite. It gets the product to market, say, 6 months faster. The exclusivity voucher is much more valuable. It comes at a time of great certainty for the manufacturer in terms of its sales and where the manufacturer may be around its peak sales. And it's longer. So the exclusivity voucher is considerably more valuable than the priority voucher. However, if the exclusivity voucher proves infeasible, the priority voucher is an option. And as Enrico said, these mechanisms are not, of course, mutually exclusive. Next. So to repeat, the priority voucher shortens the regulatory time, which moves forward sales and potentially longer sales for the manufacturer, although not extending its exclusivity. Next. We wrote this paper in 2006 proposing the priority review voucher, and it became law the following year, thanks to Senator Brownback and Senator Brown. Senator Brownback, a conservative, Senator Brown, a progressive. They made it law. Every 5 years, there's major FDA legislation, and this was part of that major FDA legislation. So we have some experience with the voucher dating back to 2007. Next. You know this. But I often have to remind other audiences there are two products for every voucher, whether this is an exclusivity voucher or a priority voucher. As was earlier pointed out, I think it was Tim said that the first drug doesn't have much commercial value. It's the second drug that has commercial value, and that's a key component, although you know that. Next. So again, the first slide is not a money maker, but it earns a voucher. And the second drug, next, makes money, uses the voucher. And this could be a drug for really any disease. In the United States, it's been used for diabetes and HIV and cholesterol. And obesity and migraine, a variety of diseases. Next slide. Okay, so here's our US experience. There's a lot going on in this graph, but what I want you to see is the bars are the number of vouchers awarded. There have been 80 vouchers awarded to date, or a little more than 80 vouchers awarded to date. And the line is the price of vouchers. And you should see that there are vouchers awarded for rare pediatric diseases, neglected tropical diseases, and medical countermeasures. Although the medical countermeasures voucher program has sunset, the rare pediatric might sunset next year, although it seems very likely that Congress will reauthorize it. So here you see there have been about 80 vouchers. Over time, as more vouchers were awarded, the price of vouchers fell. So in our 2006 paper, we predicted that vouchers would reach about $300 million. They did. But what we didn't expect, in our 2006 paper, we had in mind only neglected tropical diseases earning vouchers. When Congress expanded into rare pediatric diseases, the supply expanded and the price came down. The price has ticked up in the past 2 years. It had been pretty consistently at about $100 million. It's ticked up to 100. So consistently, vouchers have been selling for $150 million for the past year or so. I think that reflects the value of some products on the market, the growing familiarity with the voucher program, and maybe some uncertainty about the rare pediatric reauthorization. Next. Okay, so the impact of the U.S. priority review voucher. So we wrote a paper a few years ago. Pranab and Hannah wrote a paper, and I wrote a paper in Health Affairs about the experience with the tropical disease vouchers. Wong et al. Wrote a paper about rare pediatric, and I cite both of them here. So it helped Medicines Development for Global Health, a little not-for-profit in Australia, get money from investors because of the potential for a voucher. So the potential of a voucher meant that a little non-for-profit in Australia got funding for their onchocerciasis drug and made it to market. It helped J&J stay in the game. So at J&J, the question is, why do we want to keep going with bedaquiline? We're not going to make a lot of money on this drug. Well, it helps provide a commercial rationale for the big company. So the first bullet point is about a small company. The second bullet point about a big company. So, and the sale of a voucher can also provide some resources for a little not-for-profit. For example, Mundo Sando, which was involved with the Chagas drug. The Wong et al. Paper is actually quite critical of the priority review voucher. Aaron Kesselheim was one of the earliest critics of the voucher program. I'd like to think he's a little less of a critic of the priority review voucher program today, but I'm not sure of that. But this paper looked at, so critics wrote this paper examining whether the priority review voucher program was effective for rare pediatric diseases. And they showed with 95% confidence that it increased the number of drugs moving from phase 1 to phase 2 for rare pediatric diseases. Now, for the next phase, it said, well, it wasn't statistically significant. It wasn't. They could only say with, let's say, 90% confidence that the voucher program worked. Why so little confidence? Well, small sample sizes are a challenge here. Next slide. There's some burden for the regulator. The regulator has to move faster. In Europe, this would be 6 months instead of 12 months. With the U.S. priority review voucher program, in addition to using a voucher for priority review, you also provide a user fee to the regulator. That gives the regulator more resources. If they anticipate well, in Europe, it would be smaller. If you anticipate a couple of vouchers used each year, and the user fee is a couple million euros, you would budget for 4 million euros in the anticipation of receiving this revenue and being able to hire more people for drug review. Next. I mentioned earlier our concern about the voucher program is that there's a lot of vouchers, the price comes down. In the US, it came down from 300 million to 100 million. So the price of the voucher will be sensitive to the number of vouchers out there. Supply and demand work in this market as well. Next. And again, you saw that here with the price falling from 300 million to 100 million as the supply shifted out. Next. I thought I'd give you an example of one of the companies that has had the most experience with priority review vouchers, and that's Sanofi. Sanofi was awarded 3 vouchers, 2 for tropical diseases, 1 for a rare pediatric disease, and they also purchased 2 vouchers. They purchased the first voucher ever purchased was purchased by Sanofi, as well as the third voucher ever purchased. Why did they purchase them? In the first case, they're in a race in the PCSK9 inhibitor space for cholesterol. They're racing Amgen. And in the second, they were racing with the diabetes product against Novo Nordisk. Next. So Augustine, Fionn, Sarah, and I did an estimate a couple of years ago in BMJ Global Health about what would the value of a voucher be in Europe. We think that if there are a couple of vouchers awarded each year, it would be worth around 100 million euros. And that's based on sales data from Europe from the past, from some previous years. And you could double that if you also gave faster reimbursement in France and Italy and Spain. We don't mention Germany. Germany's already super fast, so faster reimbursement is not possible in Germany. But in a few of the bigger markets, that would double the value of a voucher from 100 million to 200 million euros. And if this were complementary with the US voucher program, there would not be an additional burden for manufacturers, just an additional reward. Next. Okay, and that's my website, priorityreviewvoucher.org for more information.
That's great. Thanks, David. There will be an opportunity for questions shortly, but before that, I'd like to welcome Stefan Schultz from MSD, who's going to talk about a company perspective in terms of the potential value from a priority review voucher in the European markets. Thanks for joining us, Stefan.
Thank you for the invitation. Stefan Schultz, and I'm heading the access team of MSD Europe and Canada. And I'm glad to be in Brussels today. However, some business priorities have kept me staying here. I hope you can hear me well. So MSD has a long and successful track record in antibiotic research and development from the 1930s fight against tuberculosis and the first commercialization of penicillin in the 1940s until today. And we are still actively engaged in the antimicrobial IND. So we welcome the high interest and partnership with the European Parliament and institutions. I was asked to offer a market access perspective on launches across Europe on the question, will a priority review voucher be sufficient value to make like us or others that its resale price would drive investment into antimicrobials?
Sorry, it's difficult to hear you. Do you have any headphones or something, or?
Stefan, I'm not sure whether there's anything you can do to improve it, but the sound is really quite poor on your audio.
I'm trying to change the mic. Let me change the mic here to my computer mic. Can you hear me better now? Is this better?
It's better, but it's
Just
a bit low.
if you can just speak up a bit more, but I think it is slightly better, yeah.
Yep, okay. I will try. I will speak as loud as possible and clear as possible, hopefully.
Yeah, that's definitely better than it was, yeah.
Right. I hope you understand that I'm the head of market access of MSD and was asked to give a market access or patient access perspective. So in Europe, unlike we just heard from David, faster central review rarely equals faster patient access. The true hurdles in our experience are after EMA approval in the reimbursement process. Unlike the US, you can think in Europe of 3 clocks ticking. It's the EMA review, the national HTA and price negotiations, and then it's the hospital tenders and subnational uptake. So it's very different from the US, where FDA approval means basically commercialization. And this fragmented HTA and PRR process is seen as quite cumbersome, not only by manufacturers, but also by policymakers and authorities. The Transparency Directive says that it should be 180 days from submission to approval to patient access. However, that's of course pure theory. And I've been really thrilled to hear Christine saying, without access, patient access, innovation is meaningless. And Jean-Baptiste from HERA also speaking about lighter access pathways. As David also just reiterated, faster reimbursement in certain member states is what's really needed to speed it up and to give real patient access, but also incentives for the R&D of antimicrobials. The Charles River root cause report, and we have Tim in the room, really points out that in some member states, it takes up to 840 days for patient getting access to newly approved drugs, EMA-approved pharmaceuticals. And the root cause report also calls out a lot of causes which are beyond EMA. So the PRV would probably not help for the major issue. It would speed up the first clock, the EMA approval, but not the major hurdle, the national and regional reimbursement. In our view, the PRV would have very limited value, and we've been hearing David speaking about the value, so that needs to be seen in practice, as it also would overlap with other highly innovative procedures within EMA, for example, the PRIME pathway. So highly innovative products already today can get a primary accelerated review, and the PRV would probably, just speed it up incrementally in this process. The uncertainty of the PRV will also depress the price. How much would a company really gain by a PRV instead of prolonging IP with the TEEV at the back end?
So the practical takeaway, yes, there are some potential pros. It could sharpen the regulatory planning and give EMA a formal lever to prioritize reviews. However, in our experience, that's already pretty fast, and it would not alleviate the major pain points. What would help is a mix of tools, including exclusivity-based vouchers, including revenue guarantees, including also what we heard from Jean-Baptiste, HERA, to have certain purchases on a European scale. Bottom line, the PRV would hardly accelerate patient access, but only EMA approval, which is pretty fast in many cases already. And it always takes two to launch, my last sentence, to launch a product. We cannot solve such a complex issue with a one-size-fits-all approach. But we would really advocate for a good mix of incentives for drug manufacturers. Thank you.
No, thank you, Stefan. And that is a very good point, isn't it? There isn't necessarily one size fits all. I guess I was just hoping that David might sort of respond to some of those issues that Stefan raised in terms of the challenges of translating some of the benefits of the priority review vouchers that have been apparent in the States to an EU assessing, just reflecting on Stefan's comments. Thanks.
Yes, my pleasure. And I agree with Stefan on several things. For example, that the exclusivity voucher is more valuable, would be a more powerful mechanism. Although, as you both said, perhaps we need a mix of mechanisms. And I agree with him that reimbursement is a hurdle. And that's why in our paper we estimate the value of that and how speeding reimbursement would be valuable. However, I continue to believe that if you move forward regulatory review, you will also move forward the reimbursement decision. And so everything is moving forward. I agree that the reimbursement holdup is a problem, but it's very clear from our estimates that there are plenty of drugs that are taking a year or more to review that could be reviewed in 6 months. And that would save time. We've seen this in the United States. Now, there are some drugs that do get fast review, and for them, the voucher is not valuable. It's for the drugs that would tend to have slower review. For example, in the United States, the FDA thought Biktarvy was not a particularly important drug, was going to give it standard review, but Gilead used a priority review voucher, sped that drug to market. Now Biktarvy makes billions of dollars a year. Clearly, the market thinks it's valuable, and that was very lucrative for Gilead to use that voucher. That was worth a lot to them. And it was valuable to patients. Patients got medicine sooner than they would have otherwise. So again, the two main points are, I agree the exclusivity voucher is a more powerful mechanism, but I truly believe that there is an opportunity to shrink regulatory review, and that in fact would help patients get the drug sooner, even though there's still reimbursement after it. That reimbursement is going to shift forward as the regulatory review shortens.
Thanks, David. Does anybody want to jump? Oh, sorry, Jean-Baptiste.
Yeah, I have just some clarification question for David. He showed a slide on the impact of the priority voucher on some decision that has been made on the development and investment of product for neglected diseases. But I understand the priority voucher, like the transferable data exclusivity voucher, is granted at the time of market approval. So at the time where this decision were made, there were no certainty that the voucher would be granted. Is it correct? So you got this information through survey with developer who told you this had an impact on the decision to invest? Or is there any condition on the money received from the sale of the voucher to reinvest in R&D, which I don't think it's the case. Also for the transferable voucher, there is no condition that this money is actually reinvested in R&D.
These are great questions, Jean-Baptiste. So the voucher is awarded upon regulatory approval. So how does the little not-for-profit get money up front? How did Medicines Development for Global Health get money? how did my colleague at Duke University, a professor at Duke, working on a drug for a rare disease, rare pediatric disease, for which there may be 100 babies a year affected. It's a miraculous drug. It saves the lives of 100 babies that can't make T cells, but 100 kids is not enough to make a market. So why did she get funding from investors? Why did Mark Sullivan at Medicines for Development for Global Health get money from investors? Because investors thought they could get a prize. Now, to be fair, those investors who gave Medicines for Development for Global Health money, they thought they were going to get a $200 million prize, and they only got a $100 million prize. So they were a bit disappointed in that. They actually invested in 2 drugs, one of which failed. There is risk. The other of which succeeded. But this was adjuvant capital. They are very public about this. They've made it very clear that they gave money to Medicines Development for Global Health because of the potential for a priority review voucher. Likewise, my colleague at Duke was able to get money from Roivant because of the potential for a priority review voucher. Now, we come back a bit to a question Mark raised earlier. Now, do you have to take those proceeds and pay back investors, and is there money for sort of the next thing? If the voucher price is big enough that you can reimburse investors and have some money for yourself for the next thing. Medicines Development for Global Health hoped that they'd get a $200 million voucher. At the time, the voucher prices were higher when the investors invested, and they thought that they would actually make the drug available for free. They're competing with Stefan's Merck, which is giving away ivermectin. They argue that moxidectin is a better, and there's a Lancet paper showing it's a better drug. But anyway, that's a long answer saying you can get money up front.
And maybe, sorry, just another question. So we talk on priority voucher today, having in mind how to incentivize innovation and access to antibiotic. But in this case, the antibiotic then will be the drug that you have shown in blue, not the recipient of the priority voucher. So do this drug also get a priority review? Because you sell the priority review, the blockbuster arrive faster on the market, but in this case, we do want the antibiotic rapidly on the market. So what happened to the drug that has been developed for neglected disease and that do not benefit from the priority voucher?
It's an excellent question. I should have made this point. I'm glad you made this point. Both drugs get priority review. So, and indeed, for the second drug to get priority review, the first drug has to get priority review. And this was a problem with the investors I mentioned. They failed with one product. It was because the first product was not important enough to get priority review at the FDA, so they were not going to get a bonus priority review. And I want to, Jean-Baptiste's question kind of builds on a point that Colm made earlier. Colm said earlier, with an exclusivity voucher, you need some sort of commitment by the regulator to inform the investors. The investors need to have some confidence that if this drug succeeds, it will get a voucher. And the FDA gives rare pediatric designation to a company well before approval. Say, yes, this is a rare pediatric voucher. This is a rare pediatric disease. If the first drug gets priority review, if it gets approved, yes, you will indeed get a voucher.
Can I just ask, because rare pediatrics are also orphans. So how are you separating the voucher from the orphan, because orphan disease legislation is highly impactful?
So in the United States, under the Orphan Drug Act, in Europe and Japan are a bit different. But in the United States, you get 7 years of exclusivity associated with the Orphan Drug Act. In Europe and Japan, I believe it's 10 years of exclusivity. In the United States, you also get 25% tax credits on your clinical trial costs. For many of these ultra rare diseases, that's just not enough. So my colleague who saves 100 babies a year, giving her 10 years of exclusivity, giving in the US 7 years of exclusivity on that doesn't really matter. She wouldn't have generic competition anyway. It's just not lucrative. Giving her 25% tax credits on her clinical trial costs, that's just not enough to do it. So this is orphan for rare pediatric. You get orphan incentives and that's required for many of these diseases.
Right. Thank you very much. Doesn't look like there are any more other questions in the room. Oh, sorry, there is indeed. Yeah.
Yes, David, if you could a little bit explain more, if you know, because you showed the graph where the money is, from 300 to 100, but then I saw that it goes up again. So what is the reasoning, if you know?
I have some guesses. So why did priority review voucher prices rise? I think the main factor is people have been seeing the value of the vouchers in the market in recent years. There have been some very lucrative drugs, Gilead's Biktarvy, Eli Lilly's Mounjaro, that have used vouchers, and they have been very lucrative. Another possibility, though, is that there is a little bit of uncertainty about whether the rare pediatric will be renewed. If it's not renewed, then voucher prices will probably go to 300 million or higher. And so if you think there's some uncertainty now, maybe you buy at this lower price. I think both are possibilities.
Great, thank you very much. If there are no other questions online, I think it's time to thank all our speakers and participants, both here in Brussels and online. It's been, certainly from my perspective, a fantastic chance to go through these whole range of potential incentives. And obviously we look forward to seeing the future with the EU developing a pull incentive and an impactful effect of that. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. Thank you.